Well, joining me is Australia's longest-serving Foreign Minister, in my opinion, the best, Alexander Downer. Thank you so much for your time. Look, as I said to the panel, you know, talking to China is better than not talking. But was Richard Marles, the new Defence Minister, right? Do we owe China more respect? And that's the key to getting a better relationship.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said that, and I agree with you that it certainly makes sense to talk to them, and the previous government endeavoured to talk to them, but they haven't treated Australia with respect. They've treated Australia abominably, and I think we've been right over the last 2 or 3 years to stand up to China and to make our position very clear that we're not going to be cowered or bullied by China. And by the way, that has won us a lot of respect in the United States and in other parts of the world, including in the Indo-Pacific region. So having a meeting like that, making a few silly party political points about how Labor can deal better with China than the Liberals or something like that, and then saying that we need to treat China with, in effect, we need to treat China with more respect when they've treated us with complete contempt and arrogance. I think the trouble is it sends a signal of weakness, and when you deal with China, you never want to look weak.
Well, indeed, it's signalling weakness to China in order to make a domestic political point that somehow was the Morrison government's fault by not being respectful that all this stuff happened. And I think that's so false. But this theme is strong in Labor, Alexander Downer. You look at Mark McGowan, the Labor Premier of Western Australia. He met with China's ambassador on the weekend. He promised to boost ties, while the ambassador said that, and this is so offensive, if Australia offered a good political solution, China could then lift $20 billion worth of sanctions. So again, the whole message is it's Australia's fault that China punished us, and it's up to Australia to fix it. But is that actually correct?
This is just a huge mistake. They will be chuckling in Beijing, listening to Mark McGowan, who often makes remarks like that about how everything that goes wrong in the Australia-China relationship is Australia's fault. No, we expect our premiers to stand up for Australia. When you think of the reason that China imposed these vicious sanctions they imposed, when you look at the behaviour of China, both internationally and, let me add, domestically, the way they have treated Hong Kong and the Uyghur people in Xinjiang province, the arrogant approach they've taken towards Taiwan and the South China Sea, their disregard for the norms of international trade. It's really important that Western countries, broadly defined, that liberal democratic countries, do stand up to this sort of behaviour by autocratic China. And of course, Russia as well. And honestly, up until now, the West has been very united in its approach. The Australian government has been strong. It's been supported by the Americans, by the Biden administration, by the UK government, and so on. So the last thing the West should be doing is showing weakness. And this approach by the present government has, and Anthony Albanese started off on the right foot, saying all the right things when his counterpart sent him a message when he was first elected as the Prime Minister. But this language that Richard Marles, who, as we know, is very close to China, this language that Richard Marles has been using and Mark McGowan over in Western Australia is completely wrong.
And troubling to me. Alexander Downer, look, the big picture is starting to really worry me. And look, maybe I'm jumping at shadows here, but China is suddenly much more aggressive. That bit's pretty well known now. But so are its allies, this sort of axis of evil of authoritarian regimes. Now, you've had China's defence minister on the weekend, I just showed it before, threatening war over Taiwan. It's still backing Russia in its war of aggression in Ukraine. It's also backing Iran, which is another ally, which has just switched off the TV cameras, which were placed in its nuclear sort of facilities by the International Atomic Energy Agency to check that whether Iran is actually building a nuclear bomb. If it is, then sanctions go back on. Plus, of course, you've got North Korea now threatening to test its first nuclear bomb in 5 years. Put those all together, Alexander Downer, all happening now, it seems to me there's a pattern here, and it's really frightening.
Right, and there's been a lot of commentary. I've gone back to the UK now, and there's a lot of commentary over here in the UK about this, and I think in the United States, and there's pretty much a consensus that these countries are collaborating with each other, and we do face a real threat from these autocratic regimes, and the liberal democracies need to bind together much more tightly and, frankly, more aggressively. And in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they've been doing that. I want to make one other point about China, because when you describe that, it reminds me to say that I think in Beijing, there are many who realize that China has overstepped the mark, has overplayed its hand, might be the better way of putting it, that they have generated a huge reaction from the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, the Quad would never have evolved as it's evolved with India if it hadn't been for China's aggression. They are binding countries together in a coalition against them. So there's a realization that this type of diplomacy, the wolf warrior diplomacy of Beijing, sanctions on countries, threats and blandishments of one kind or another are actually proving to be counterproductive. And we need to play into that debate in Beijing and play into the debate about whether Xi Jinping's foreign policy has, after all, been so smart, by the way, ending up as an ally of Russia's in its catastrophic war in Ukraine. So, yeah, this is not the time to take... I agree with you, but the problem is, Alexander,
no, it isn't. But the problem is, of course, when you say that, we have to assume that there is an opposition to Xi Jinping that isn't scared out of its brain, you know, from his persecution, or isn't in jail, or threatened with a bullet. So that's the only thing, whether you can actually do that. People are saying his power is absolute. We shall see. But I agree with you completely. Alexander Downer, thank you so much for your time.